Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this continuing conversation with my good friend, Kurt Francom of Leading Saints. Kurt?
Hey, Jacob, thanks for having me back. So let's keep it going.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. So in our last episode, we were talking about the situation of men within the church, and specifically, we were getting into the subject of sort of that men are failing, and that really it isn't just about giving them their duties and saying, you need to do these hard things, but rather that there's something deeper inside of men that is lacking, and that isn't, that the male heart isn't being fulfilled. And I think that you're right. I think that somewhere deep down, there's a level to which the male heart is not being fulfilled. But we live in a society and a culture now that seems to even mention that there's such a thing as a male heart as somehow distinct from a female heart, that men and women are essentially the same, or in any meaningful sense. I want to start, I guess, first, before even talking about our heart, is just the subject of our identity as men. Like, what does it mean to be a man in the context of the gospel?
Yeah.
Let's and maybe that's a big one, but I'd like to kind of delve into that a little bit with you. I mean, if someone were to ask you that question, what does it mean to be a man in the gospel? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah. And I think this is the biggest question that we could answer in the context of an elders quorum, because we have such a deep theology and doctrine about this concept of identity and what it means to be a man. And a lot of times I think we think we figured it out, but again, we're missing it. The identity is the core of, I mean, it's at everything we do in the restored gospel. I mean, the new name, we receive a new name at baptism. We go to the temple, receive a new name. Like, there's something about identity that is being endowed upon us, and it is remarkable. But we sometimes go through the motions and just think, I'm just doing the things, but we miss the deeper concept that can really ignite the heart of man to continue on down a covenant relationship with God.
So it's funny. It was Dr. Jordan Peterson that I was listening to who brought up this concept of identity, because we talk about identity, but if you actually want to ask the deeper question, you have to ask the question, what do we even mean by identity? Like, what are we talking about? And he had this analogy that I thought was absolutely brilliant. It finally, in my mind, made sense. And I want to get your thoughts on this, that your identity, I'll just say it kind of short and then I'll kind of talk about it, but your identity is your relationship to the game that you're playing. So for instance, if you are a catcher on a baseball team, everyone's playing baseball, and you're the catcher, you know what your role is in the game.
Yeah.
Your identity tells you, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I have this part in this worthwhile game that we're trying to play. And so we all interact with each other as human beings in this game that we call baseball. And something really beautiful and wonderful comes out of this game, right?
Yeah.
So the problem is we live in this culture that says no one should define your identity. You just go out there, and it's like telling your kid, Timmy, you go out there on the baseball diamond and don't you let anybody tell you who you are or what you have to do. And so you got Timmy out there in the outfield, he's jumping around, and and it's like he's playing unicorn while we're all playing baseball.
Right.
Yeah. And in a society of moral relativism, where an expressive individualism that just says, hey, be whatever you want to be, you end up in a situation where we have a bunch of kids out on the baseball diamond running around not knowing what the heck they're doing there, purposeless, meaningless, and eventually they all get bored and are like, what are we doing here? Where if you're on the field that's designed for baseball, you're supposed to play baseball. And so when you take that concept and you morph it into the idea of, well, what's the game that a man is playing? What's the game that a father is playing? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And I think the gospel is uniquely qualified to give us our understanding of the game, the biggest game of all.
Right.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
And this is why this has to be done in a context of theism, that there needs to be a divine guide who's bestowing identity, right? And this is where I think a lot of people in the world of Jordan Peterson and the Stoics sometimes take a left turn and end up in this sort of, it's often framed as toxic masculinity, right? I'm a man's man and nobody's going to tell me what to do. And I'm going to get in there and get the sale and, have the Ferrari and this and that, because there was no breath of then turning to God and saying, okay, I think I know who I am, but who do you think I am? And that's why not only do we need a theistic context, we need a Latter-day Saint context. Like the restored gospel is the most powerful tradition to bestow identity because of our faith traditions, that we build up to this moment where we go to a temple, to a castle, and receive a royal charge, right? And then not only are we the catcher on the field, what if you are royalty in the world?
Yeah.
How does that impact how you act and move forward?
And unlike other faith traditions, it's gender specific.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is that men and women play a different position in a game. Now they are, you can't say, well, we don't need the catcher on our baseball team,
right,
or we don't need the pitcher.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you need both of them.
Yeah.
They're going to do different things. They have different places in the kingdom. They have different roles. They have different natures, but they both are essential to the game, and neither one can be neglected. And It's interesting because I want to go real quick to a clip that I actually had that I wanted to play from the Bishop Barron interview that we were talking about last video, and specifically talk about, I think this, when you're your own man. So if you're an expressive individualist, which basically means, look, the world is your oyster. You can kind of do whatever you want in the world, right? The baseball diamond's out there, but just play whatever game you want. It kind of leads to this world that I believe, and I think Bishop Barron talks about, kind of leads you to either hedonism, where you do whatever the heck you want on the baseball diamond, but then eventually you get bored. And then you end up realizing there's no game to even be played here. It's all just make-believe nonsense. And then you sink into the hole of nihilism. And I thought he made some interesting commentary about this in relation to our society. So I'll pull up this clip.
All that. And see, it's much needed because we live, and that's the nihilistic thing. There are no values. I just make it up as I go along. Don't tell me what to do. I'm my own boss. See, all of that is just deadly. As I've often said, it's like saying, just give me that 5-iron and I'll swing it any way I want to. And well, you'll be the worst golfer in America, right? Give me that violin. Don't tell me how to play it. I'll just figure it out. Well, unless you're a genius. Maybe you're a genius. By the way, Aristotle called that a godlike man. It's very interesting. He had that category, that there might be a godlike man that doesn't even need to be habituated because he just is, he's virtuous off the scale. But they said, look, that's so rare. Let's not even bother talking about it, right? So we can fall into that sort of weird, like, just give me the violin because I'm just, I'm Itzhak Perlman by some miracle. No, but 99.9% of us need a lot of habituation in order to internalize the virtues of playing a violin. Same with the moral life, which is why nihilism and all that is a complete disaster. What's hedonism? But just what gives me pleasure. That's all that matters. Well, yeah, then you'll live like a child. That's the way a 3-year-old lives. That's why we have to discipline kids and move them along. You know that, with raising your own kids. If we just left them to their own devices, they'd be 30-year-old hedonists. Plenty of them, by the way, right? There are plenty of them, by the way, in the world that were never disciplined, never brought into a moral consciousness. And so just please me, whatever gives me pleasure.
So I think he's hitting exactly what we were just talking about with that baseball diamond analogy. But this is the funny thing that theism brings to the table. If you're on the baseball diamond, you can do whatever you want, and eventually you get bored and sink into nihilism. That's the hedonism and nihilism problem. But what the moral life implies is that there is an actual design to the field that you're on. There's a game that you're supposed to be playing to reach your full fulfillment. And that is to say that our conscious lives are the world that we exist in, including not only the physical, but let's say the metaphysical, and the spiritual, that they are real and that they are ordered. And that in order to find your fulfillment, you have to align with this order. So again, like you're saying, theism takes you to a step where that is actually possible to be in such a designed place. But our tradition in particular goes into the direct nature of you as a man and says, here's your role. And this is where you'll find fulfillment.
Yeah, it not only reveals your role or identity, but it reveals the game that you're playing, right? That this is baseball. And look how dynamic it is when it works. And, and going back to the first session, this misframing we often hear in the church of, just keep the commandments and you'll be happy. Right now, of course, it's a great model, speaking generally, it's a great model to find happiness and fulfillment in life. And what happens though is individuals leave the church and they think they told me I'd never be happy out here, but I'm quite happy. And my critique is like, yeah, you will be happy and you may be happy for a while, but it will not last. And I know you don't believe me, but at some point that suffering will come and you won't know how to reconcile suffering. You will have no God to give it to and to surrender it so that he can strengthen you and return you to the field for that suffering. Right.
And ultimately they say, I'm happy, but do you live in isolation? Like maybe I'm happy doing things that are actually really bad for my family, really bad for the society, because the game that we're playing isn't just your game. See, that's one of the things I don't like about sort of the expressive individualist worldview. It pretends that you are the center of the universe, but you're not. At the end of the day, there are other people, and the perfect game is the one that maximizes everything for everyone forever. Mm-hmm. And so that's that's sort of the other issue that I get into with sort of the people that want to go down that route without recognizing it. But at the same time, there can be too much sort of rigid conformity. Baseball has rules, but within the game of baseball, it doesn't mean that you have to do things the exact same way every time. A baseball game or a football game or whatever game you're playing, they're dynamic. Mm-hmm. And the gospel, like, yeah, the rule says, don't cheat on your wife, right? Like there's a rule. It's hard and fast. You know what I'm saying? But some men allow even just the culture of the church to stifle their ability to express themselves at all.
Right.
And I think that's the other sort of extreme of it. And Jordan Peterson talks about kind of too much order, right? Or too much chaos. Too much chaos, there's no rules at all. And too much order is sort of like the game that we're playing has so many rules that there's no chance to actually express your courage on the field because there's a rule on how high you can jump or how fast you can run or, those kinds of things. Yeah. And so I think that there's a balance there.
Absolutely. Because you can go too far where you're just playing the game and, or you see it in the context of real life as conformity. Like we just want the elders to act a certain way. We just need them, or we need youth to go on missions just because that's just what you do. And you should really do that. Or we need you to minister because that's just how we're playing the game right now. And we need you to go out and visit people. When nobody stepped back and said, well, what is your calling? Like what is thriving within your heart and pulling you a certain way? We want you're being pushed to be the catcher, but maybe you're the left fieldman. And let's talk about that. What intrigues you about that path, and how can we help you get there rather than, listen, we just don't have a catcher this week, so could you just play catcher and everything will move forward just fine?
For sure. And I've found that, within the church, we have these roles that we're called to fulfill. But you can also, what I've found is that if you get in and you inspire someone, like, I think that's sort of as I look at it, I often say this, I don't want people, we shouldn't call people to repentance. We should inspire them to repentance.
Yeah.
Right. Again, going back to this idea that we talked about last time of it coming from inside, from the heart. Right. And that's where that changes everything. That's the difference between, the works of the law without faith, or faith, our works emerging from our faith, from our love for something. And if we can help people to see why they should love the things in their life, it can transform them. But men in particular have a nature and a type of heart. You talked about in your interview with Greg Mattson sort of these three things that kind of men that seem to, in your estimation, seem to sort of get into the male heart. Right. What were those things?
Yeah, so this comes from John Eldridge's book, Wild at Heart, and he talks about there's three core desires of every man's heart: a battle to fight, an adventure to live, and a beauty to love. And now those manifest themselves in very different ways. I'm not the type of guy that's going to take the weekend and go hunt and, shoot something and gut it and cook it up for dinner. Like, that's just not me. But for others, that's a very fulfilling experience for their masculine heart. That the adventure of going out into the woods and doing that. The battle of, I love watching these documentaries about like Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, some of the top level athletes who they were obsessed about the championship. They were obsessed about hoisting that trophy at the end of the season. And that is a very masculine experience, to the point that it draws men from around the world to engage and watch that journey, because something in them, they want a trophy to hoist. They want a platform to stand on, knowing, like you brought up earlier, that I did something really difficult and I failed and I had a hard time, but I succeeded, thanks to the grace of Jesus Christ and whatnot. But this is the battle is in every man's heart. The adventure is there. I talked to one man who's saying, I've never felt closer to God than when I'm out on the river fly fishing. I'm like, well, it sounds like you need to spend a little more time out on the river fly fishing if that's a divine experience for you, and where you can engage with divinity. Where a lot of people, you fish too much, you just need to be home with your family. Like, wait a minute, no, that man's heart needs consistent time on the river. And then a beauty to love. I mean, nations and empires have fallen because of the beauty that's out there tempting. But we need that, but we need an appropriate structure, right? And you see that in toxic masculinity, where they have the porn and the women and the sex and all that, and they think, well, is that a fulfilling life? How's that working out for you? No, we need a beauty to offer strength to say that, I have what it takes to show up for this family, to give what this family needs. And again, not that you're the sole provider, all those things, but a man needs that assurance. So those are the three core desires that John Eldridge frames.
Yeah, and I think those are great. I think one thing is that everyone has their unique sort of talents and personality. Like first, like your fishing analogy. Mm-hmm. And again, not to push back on it so much, but more to clarify, I think, is that yes, you also as a man need to make sure that you are having the time to fulfill the things that you want, right? Like yes, we want to give ourselves to our family and stuff, but as you've rightly said, the problem is that if you can't give anything out of an empty cup,
right?
You have to some level, you also have to do the things that make you come alive. So not for hedonistic purposes at the end of the day,
correct,
but to renew yourself so that you are invigorated as a man to continue to be the best version of yourself. Because if you neglect yourself, you will collapse into it. It isn't just sacrifice yourself the whole time. It's you want to, because then you'll end up pouring everything out of your cup. At some point you have to refill, you have to replenish. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And we all are different in that way. And not only that, I think we get into trouble when we start to look at men masculine, women feminine. The reality is that every man and every woman is a mixture of masculinity and femininity. Mm-hmm. You have men that are more feminine than others. You have women that are more masculine than others. Now, the trend generally, as we're talking in generalities about men, is that men tend to be more masculine than women. But I've learned to look at the masculine and the feminine as more like, for lack of a better term, spiritual energies that we have. And that if you imbalance your society or your family in any one of those, you have a problem, right? They're meant to fit together as a yin and a yang. I actually think that's one of the profound reasons that we have our doctrines about the nature of male and female becoming one flesh, is that not only on sort of the physical level to create children, but on a spiritual energy level, for lack of a better term, you need both of those energies, because an imbalance of either one is a problem, right?
Yeah.
And every one of us already come, like, you don't have to look at a man who's a little more feminine and say, oh, well, you're not a man. He's just a less feminine male. And you're a girl who has masculine energy. That's fine. She's still a woman, but it will manifest, her femininity might, or she may manifest herself differently than a man. And I think that whole energy mix is what is causing so much of the confusion now, to where if you have a woman with high levels of masculine energy, it's like, well, you're a man. It's like, no, she's just a tomboy. And that's okay.
Right. Yeah.
And so within our individual personalities and talents, I think that we can figure out how to harness and to harness our individual natures and our natures as men, which tend to be masculine, and ensure that our masculine natures are being fulfilled through whatever it is that scratches that itch within the bounds of the gospel, because at the end of the day, those are kind of the boundaries of the game we're playing. We don't want to go and sort of mess up the game by breaking the rules and cause harm and problems, not only to ourselves potentially, maybe we enjoy it, but it'll cause harm to others and mess up the game that humanity is playing.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the main point that John Eldridge is often making, is that we weren't just born like, oh, I'm a man, I tend to like hunting and sports, and it is what it is. But no, like, God put these things in us, like he says, sort of this energy that it is as we lean into that energy that we'll find deeper fulfillment. And if we don't consider that into the calculation, we're going to have a difficult time finding that fulfillment. And then, we think, well, I think I just have to do whatever I want to do on the field here, because the game's not working for me. But no, we have to recognize the things God put in our heart, and we'll find fulfillment on that path.
Absolutely. I'm going to read real quick a quote from one of my favorite books. So Brett McKay, we already mentioned, he's one of the ones I actually have been talking about in all these articles. He has the Art of Manliness blog and podcast, which everyone should go check out. It's great. Brett's a Latter-day Saint. Excellent stuff. He wrote this book called The Art of Manliness Manvotionals, Timeless Wisdom and Advice on Living the 7 Manly Virtues. And in the introduction, this has been something I have shared even in sacrament talks, because I think it is just so good. And it says there are 2 ways to define manhood. One is to say that manhood is the opposite of womanhood. The other is to say that manhood is the opposite of childhood. The former seems quite popular, but it often leads to a superficial kind of manliness. Men who subscribe to this philosophy end up cultivating a manliness concerned with outward characteristics. They worry about whether X, Y, or Z is manly, and whether the things they enjoy and do are effeminate, because many women also enjoy them. We advocate for the latter philosophy, meaning that it's the opposite of childhood. Manhood concerns one's inner values. A child is self-centered, fearful, and dependent. A man is bold, courageous, respectful, independent, and of service to others. Thus, a boy becomes a man when he matures and leaves behind childish things. Likewise, a girl becomes a woman when she matures into real adulthood. Both genders are capable of and should strive for virtuous human excellence. When a woman lives the virtues, that is womanliness. When a man lives the virtues, that is manliness. Women and men strive for the same virtues, but often attain and express them in different ways. The virtues will be lived and manifested differently in the lives of sisters, mothers, and wives than in brothers, fathers, and husbands. 2 different musical instruments playing the exact same notes will produce two different sounds. The difference in the sounds is one of those ineffable things that is hard to describe with words, but easy to discern. Neither instrument is better than the other in the hands of the diligent and dedicated. Each instrument plays music that fills the spirit and adds beauty to the world.
Amen. That's great.
Yeah,
That's great.
it was really, really good. And I've used that anytime somebody points to sort of the man versus woman sort of thing without realizing that it isn't men versus women. It's just the wrong way of thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that we have different approaches to many things, and it's like, we're different instruments, and that's what makes an orchestra sound so great. And one instrument couldn't do it on its own.
Now, I want to I was thinking about going in to talk a little bit about Pelagianism.
Mm-hmm. A new word for me, by the way, Jacob.
Yeah, it was a new one for me before Bishop Barron had talked about it. And I guess maybe let's listen to Bishop Barron talk about this, and then you can go ahead and comment on some of your thoughts on that, and then we'll kind of go backwards. I know we have some notes here of things we talk about, but I wanted to hit this one now just because I think that it's a pressing issue that we should be aware of as we're talking about this, these issues. So let me real quickly pull this up.
Having said all of that and not gainsaying a bit of it, right? So I affirm everything we've just been saying. The danger is this, and it's a very old problem. St. Augustine wrestled with it. The danger is Pelagianism, right? So Pelagius, who taught at the same time as Augustine, I know we're all sinners and we're all fallen, but with enough get up and go and decision and do the right thing, we can save ourselves. We can find our way forward. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and be a morally upright person, and you'll be okay. And see, Augustine, one of his signal contributions was to speak against Pelagius. Now, why? Because if Pelagius is right, then we don't need a savior. If Pelagius is right, and Pelagius has 1 million descendants up and down the centuries to the present day. And see, I'm not going to give that title to the people we've been talking about, but that's the shadow. That's the shadow. It's a Pelagian shadow. Is I can save myself. Follow these steps and you'll be a happy, upright person. Go back to Romans chapter 7. And Augustine was deeply indebted to Paul, as you know. The good that I would do, that's what I don't do. And the evil that I would avoid, that's what I do. Who will deliver me from this body of death? Paul asks. Answer, Jesus Christ, my Savior.
So what are your thoughts on that clip?
Yeah, this is so important to cover that, there is this need to step up and to step into a calling and be the protagonist, right? But if you do that path without God, it just won't work. Or what happens to the moment when you're wounded and hurt and you experience overwhelming suffering that you have no savior to give it to? And later on in the clip, he makes this connection with the root word of salve and salvation, right? That we all need a salve on on our wounds that heals us, and that's the temptation, that, and I see this a lot, that these men out there who are doing the 75 hard, they're doing all the hard things and pumping the iron, and they're sort of they look like they're making themselves as a man. And, it's great. I'm glad they're engaged with those things. But if you don't have this return to the sacred, to God, like, again, that will work for a time, but it's not enduring. And you need a savior to turn to give your suffering, or else it'll be too unbearable.
Yeah. And I think this would be a good segue into this other clip, because I think a lot of people feel like the call to be like Jesus is sort of an effeminizing, because it is the man who's independent. I don't need a savior. I'm going to just man up. I'm going to go David Goggins on this and just like, I'm just going to make it happen.
Right.
And anyway, I'm going to pull up this other clip from Bishop Barron again, and
Okay.
let's see what he has to say about it real quick.
Largely lost that.
I want to bring this back to Christianity for a moment. In his article, Shane Morris has a telling anecdote. He says, quote, "The contrast between Stoicism and the attitude common in churches today is hard to miss. I think of a friend who started a Friday morning book study with other Christian men who felt they needed more than they were getting in church in terms of understanding specific ways that Christ's manhood could inform theirs. He observed that the goal of men's Bible studies often feels suspiciously like replicating women's Bible studies, complete with frequent expressions of vulnerability and emotional intimacy. For my friend," he says, "the problem was simple. The call to be like Jesus often sounded like a call to be less of a man." And as he explained at this inaugural Friday study, all the men around him agreed. That seems to me to raise an important question. Is there something distinct about the way men are called to follow Christ as disciples? We've seen lots of men's groups, conferences. I think of Exodus 90, the ascetical program in the church. What else can we be doing to disciple men in particular?
Well, everything we've talked about, but I think to your question, yes, and we should avoid, easy stereotypes. Of course, there's variations within this, but generally speaking, yes, men don't like sitting in a circle sharing their feelings. Men prefer, I think, a challenge. They like to be given something hard to do, summoned to mission and action. I think men respond to that more readily. Again, generally speaking, all that. So I think everything we've talked about would be valuable if you want to get men more involved. Be harder, not softer. Be more demanding, not less demanding. Go against the instinct that says, "Oh God, to get the kids or get the young high school kids, we got to really bend over." No, backwards. I'd say no. On the contrary, challenge them. Bring them on a hike in the woods or something, and have them do something that's physically demanding, and then give them a moral and spiritual challenge. I think men would.
So when I saw that clip, it was funny because I had just recently returned from our high adventure trip with the young men, and how that always, again, talking about the strengths that we have in the young men's program, the most compelling thing probably for men in the church that we all remember were our high adventure trips. A lot of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially the ones that were danger and crazy, and somebody, was like a little on the edge to where mom was nervous. Like those were always the good ones.
Yes, absolutely. And then my question is, why aren't we still doing that for older men? I mean, what is the difference between an Elders Quorum experience and a Relief Society experience? I mean, look, on Sunday, we're studying the same talk. We're lining up the rows the same way. We're starting with the prayer and whatever. And that's it. So what, and this isn't just a question that only Elders Quorum presidents can change. Any man in the church can have influence to changing this, that men don't need Relief Society meeting, right? And I don't know what exactly women need, and that's for them to wrestle with and talk about. And that's a discussion for another time. But like one simple thing that I've done. I'm not in an Elders Quorum presidency or anything, but every other week I have a guys' night, a guys' movie night at my house, and we watch some manly show. I mean, nothing too intense, and I invite guys over, and it's remarkable what happens when you bring a group of men together without their spouses. And I had one wife reach out to my wife and said, "Tell me about this thing Kurt's doing, because my husband doesn't really have friends. So what's going on here?" Like it's so important that we make sure that we're doing something that is fulfilling that masculine heart, because we do a great job with the youth. We do a great job with missionaries. But then where is it when you get into your 30s, 40s, and 50s and beyond?
It is kind of funny that there's that joke that Jesus, one of his greatest miracles was having 12 friends as a 30-something-year-old.
Yeah, exactly.
Although you had mentioned that it was actually 11.
That's right. You really only had 11 friends. But.
So I was going to say, though, with that, practically speaking, within an elders quorum, one thing that I think is actually creates more of a challenge is the fact that we've merged high priests and elders into the same quorum together. Because if you're trying to put together an activity that's going to appeal to everyone, the problem is you're not going to put together an activity that's going to appeal to the guy who's 83 and crossed the plains with the pioneers,
Right.
and the guys who are 20 somethings and newly marrieds. And I guess in my mind, it's like, well, then don't try and appeal to everyone.
Right.
Create activities that are specific to specific interests for specific people, but also. The thing is that even activities like I've noticed this. So one, I've coached football both at the high school level. Right now I'm actually coaching my son's Pop Warner football team. And I noticed something about football and just about men in general. Men bond not by sitting around and talking with each other about their feelings or about things. Men bond, generally speaking, by getting together and doing something that requires some kind of coordinated challenge amongst a group of men.
Yeah.
That is why men are obsessed with team sports. That's also why I went to BYU Hawaii and I noticed a pattern. There are a bunch of these guys from California that were there, and they and a lot of them I noticed had these really good relationships with their dads, and I noticed that there was a common thread. Their dads and their sons surfed together. And I've realized when I've bonded with my own father, it's when we go out hunting or doing other things, because I am into that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Or with sports. And it isn't this verbal thing. Like, it's funny because women will say like, oh, men don't show any emotion and all that. You go watch a group of men who just won the championship.
Yeah, absolutely.
You will dang near see them kissing each other. They will be embracing and lifting each other up on each other's shoulders. Men are different. We express ourselves differently. Now, like I said, there are men that have more of a feminine character, but that's fine. And there are women that are more that way, understanding that. But in general, that's what happens. And so if you want to have a great activity, you have to look at the things that are going to touch that part of them. And not even, and it's weird though, because like, if I were to say, okay, like with the young men, I don't look at the young men and say, oh, which one of these boys are really into hiking up a big old freaking mountain and then like, huffing it back down, when these kids are like super into sitting around playing video games. But I know that inside of them, they have these little masculine hearts that are developing. And I know that if I give them a challenge and they do it, they'll get a ton out of it.
Yes.
And so it isn't, I think that we do something wrong when we base our activities around the interests necessarily. I think we got to be careful. I'm not saying that isn't a factor, but into the natures of people. Because if I went into my elders quorum and proposed, just things that people are interested in, it might not always be things that I don't know.
Right.
I just think that's something to consider anyway.
Yeah. So I think the big mistake we fall into is that we think it has to be an activity. Now, yes, get your elders quorum out of the elders quorum room as often as possible. And this doesn't mean like, oh, what are you saying? Like during the second hour during elders quorum, we have to go, go out and hike or something. Like, no, that wouldn't be practical. But the point being is that oftentimes, the budget we have and whatnot is, maybe we'll do that yearly pizza party. Let's get together and maybe we'll play some games. I mean, that's a good start. But really, like just finding the hikers in the group and doing that, connecting the fishermen in the group and having them go do that. Like these aren't even things that require a budget or a formal activity. Get all the movie guys like me, right? And then let's go to a movie and go see that guy film. And the conversation that happens in the parking lot after is priceless, right? Because you're engaging in something that's connecting with those things. But even just the dynamics of getting into a quorum room and let's hear the 80-year-old story. And what you're going to find is that maybe there was that war he fought in, or these years in the military, or, you know, being a young father and making it happen. And when I started my business, like, he's going to tell stories that are going to draw the other men in and make him more endearing to us. And then we'll see him more as a mentor, someone to reach out to, someone to find brotherhood with, right? And so I think there's even a lot of things we can do during that every other week quorum meeting to just, like, you know, let's not jump into the lesson. Let's not just read this quote and that quote. Let's talk about the moments of, you know, the man moments happening in your life. Who recently went on that hike? What was that like, right? And you'll often hear those stories come to the surface that feed that masculine heart and connect men, so that they then go out and, hey, I didn't know you hiked. Like, I'm going to hike such and such peak this weekend. Let's go, right? And that's exactly what our faith traditions should stimulate.
And I think that's such a great point. I mean, we're meeting twice a month for an hour.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry. And we're supposed to have a lesson in that time, take up most of it.
Right.
Like, you're not going to get any kind of real deep, coherent unity within that unless there are things going on outside of it. And I think that that's a brilliant kind of way to think of it, is figure out the interest groups. Like, I know in mine, there's a bunch of us that, like, all right, guarantee we're interested in business. Like, what if you put together like a once a month sort of business luncheon that you get together and you talk about business and talk about your business problems, how you overcome some of those things? Or maybe there's a sports group that gets together and they do things. Or maybe, and the thing is I think we got to look outside of our quorums, look into the broader stake. There are, like, at the stake level, I bet you could get enough guys together to, if you got a bunch of guys who love to play basketball, I guarantee you can get that. Yeah. I mean, you can do some of that. I think that we get stuck into the ruts. And I think that actually is, I don't think that is an institutional problem from the top necessarily.
No, absolutely not.
I think that we at the stake and ward levels need to recognize that we can be creative and we can create these sort of sub communities within the community and that have no budget. And that's fine. We don't need to have the budget. You just go and do things of your own free will to build the kingdom.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And that, I don't know, that's just super, you know, fulfilling. And you were talking about mentors because, you know, I don't know. I think that is such a key point. And Bishop Barron talks about it. And I want to roll that clip real quick because I think it's relevant here.
Yeah. Good luck with that program.
I don't want to put words in your own mouth, but it seems like one thing you're gesturing toward is that we as a church and we as a culture have dropped the ball when it comes to providing mentors into masculinity. Yeah. It strikes me that these names we've already mentioned, Ryan Holiday, Jocko Willink, Jordan Peterson, the author adds a few more later in his article, Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, and Brett McKay, whom you recently spoke with on his Art of Manliness podcast. All of these men are filling a gap that we have, that whether, you know, young men didn't have father figures or priest figures or adult male friends, whatever the case, they lacked that initiation, that mentorship that maybe past generations received. Yeah.
And the proof's in the pudding. You know, the very fact that these people are attracting a lot of young men to them, that proves it. You know, I don't know if you remember, Brandon, I've ever seen this movie, Boys Town from 1940, I think. Spencer Tracy plays Father Flanagan, right? The founder of Boys Town. Oh, yeah. And the other star of the movie is a young, very young Mickey Rooney, and he's this tough street kid, you know. And the movie is all about how Father Flanagan, this, you know, in a way, mild-mannered priest and good-hearted priest, but was a very tough mentor to this street kid and brought him to the point of virtue. But it was the priest as moral hero, you know, not as, hey, you're just great. His name was Whitey, the kid. You're just great, Whitey. Everything you say and do is wonderful. I affirm you in every way. Hey, tell me how you feel about this. There wasn't an ounce of that. It was a tough, demanding priest who was leading this kid. And watch the movie, to the great Spencer Tracy, who won the Academy Award that year for his role. Watch him work. Watch how a mentor does his work. And I think we have largely lost that.
So what are your thoughts? Have we lost mentorship in the church?
The reality is masculinity bestows masculinity. John Elders says that a lot. And, you know, we sometimes get buried in our career and life challenges and whatnot. And, of course, we've got our spouse there, generally speaking, and we sort of take our, we look to our wife for advice, or what do you think about this situation? And of course, those are important conversation to have, but to have a mentor, to have a masculine figure that we can go to, a father figure in our life, it is crucial that we have that. And men need men. And this is a big part of it, that we need people who can look us in the eyes and say, no, you're messing up here. You got to change. You need some of that tough love. And so, and man, again, like, we have the engine with Elders Quorum, we have the structure, we have the framing. We just don't know how to turn the engine on. And there's so many mentorship opportunities in that group. And
even within the ward itself, I look at my bishop very much as a mentor to me. Mm-hmm. I have a wonderful bishop, and I've had several wonderful bishops that I've looked up to. And I think that the reason the bishop is put into that position, and maybe one of the reasons that it is a man who acts in that role, is that he acts as a mentor to the other men in the group, and that he acts as a mentor to those men for how they should be. A bishop should be a model of discipleship and of how to live the gospel. And I've been very, very blessed to have excellent, excellent bishops. I think the same go for other priesthood leaders in the church. And that is critical for men. And so the structure is there, whether they do it. The thing that I worry about in our culture today is that we have this sort of a culture that always wants to tell everyone, hey, you're just fine the way you are. A bishop's role as the judge in Israel obviously isn't to be some tyrant, but he should be the one that is willing to and able to, and have the relationship with people to where he can say, hey, you really need to be better about this. Mm-hmm. I know you're better than this. I had a coach who pulled me and some of the other track athletes aside. And this was my senior year. We were a really good track team, and I was on the 4x4 relay. And he pulled us aside after he was like yelling at us and stuff. And we were running, and he came up and he said, you know why I'm yelling at you? You ever see me with these other kids? You notice I don't yell at them? He's like, that's because those kids aren't going anywhere. You guys have potential, and that's why I'm coming down, and I know that you can do more, and I'm going to pull it out of you. And I think there's that kind of mentorship for me was so important. And in our culture, I worry that church leaders end up being these nice grandpas that all they want to do is like, hey, Sonny, you're just doing fine and everything's good, instead of giving us, and it has to be done in the right way because it's very difficult, but it's necessary that you have somebody there that you can go to. And if you're a good athlete, you go to that coach and you say, Coach, what can I do better?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that should be the way that we interact with these mentors that we have in the church. And I don't know, I've found that the mentors, I actually think this is one of the areas that the church is much stronger. I think we have weaknesses, but I think we are much stronger in having mentorship available to members of the church when compared to other institutions out there that I think, in society generally there isn't. And so men are just adrift.
Yeah. And I feel like I've kind of seen it go too far the other way, that there's this overwhelming or this undertone to every church talk, to every lesson of, you know what, you're just not doing enough. And I think there is a place for men to come together on Sunday and find a lot of grace there, of that feeling of divine love, so that they're propelled by that motivation of love rather than fear of, well, God sure is disappointed in you because you keep dropping the ball, man. So I think where we go wrong is we don't establish that relationship like your coach had with you to really say, true. Hey, listen, like, I love you. I love you. And let's have a really hard conversation. We typically lead out with, you know what, you're just not doing enough. And if you don't get your act together, God sure is disappointed in you. And that's a flawed message.
And that's where you have the bad coach.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean? A coach is just a mentor.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just drive they don't have the relationship necessary to offer the correction.
Yeah.
Where when you truly are inspired by we all have those people in our lives that, like, when they talk to you and give you that look like you can do better, you go,
right.
Well, like,
yeah, let's do
you're
this.
right.
All right. Yep.
Yeah. So to kind of wrap this up as we kind of get into it, what what do you see as what can church offer men in particular? Like, what does the church have to offer?
Man, the church has to offer some remarkable theology, and I think we could do better at really framing this. I just went to the temple with my nephew, who is leaving on a mission, so this is first time. And in the celestial room, I whispered to him, "You are royalty now and married to God." Like that. That is a redemptive message. Oh, you went to the temple. Okay, let's go get our pictures. Like, you're doing the things. Like, no, you are now in a relationship with God that you can do anything. You can overcome anything, because it's going to get hard out there, right? So I think we can frame our doctrine a little bit better, and then create that. Let Elders Quorum breathe a little bit. Don't jump into the lesson so quickly. What's going on in men's life? Just simply ask them that question: what makes your heart come alive? What is it? And do you feel fulfilled in life? Why or why not? Let's come together as a quorum and investigate that to the point till we figure out what it is, what story you need to step into that it appears a little risky, but get you off of Tatooine and get you into a developmental identity revealing journey that will reveal God's glory and is remarkable. And so, I mean, on the more practical level, I would say to any Elders Quorum president, your first job is to march into the bishop's office and request an equal budget as the Relief Society, because they get a lot more money, so that you can actually do things. Figure out the groups of men who have similar interests and get them engaging, so that the quorum is offering them community, and masculinity bestows masculinity, and stimulate that. And then, create a quorum meeting where we can hear each other's stories. If I was to do Elders Quorum president again, especially as a professional podcaster, I would take time to articulate, interview every man in that, with the men listening and saying, "Tell me about your story. Where you been? Where you come from? What do you expect out of life? How's it going?" And those stories will connect and bind that group that more than any superficial pizza party could do. And then finally, like, offer them grace. Like, don't always come at them with that, "Well, you could do a little bit more. You're sort of falling short." Being like, isn't it remarkable that we have a divine being who saved us through his grace, that we can get up one more week? We've all just left sacrament meeting and committed one more time, that we can do this. And that, I love how Jeff McCullough, our mutual friend, says that the cross of Calvary should be imprinted on every person who leaves your message. And I believe that in our faith tradition, we could do better at allowing people to leave with a feeling of grace and redemption, so that's where they find strength to face another week.
Yeah. And I think that men are incredibly thirsty for inspiration.
Oh, yeah.
To feel inspired. And when men feel inspired, they change their behavior.
Yep.
I think that what the gospel offers men is the most inspiring story you could ever be told.
Absolutely.
Now, granted, that story also, as C.S. Lewis said, it doesn't begin in a place of comfort. It begins as a recognition that you're a flawed individual.
Yes.
But it ends in a place of comfort when you realize that despite your flaws and things, you're loved by God, and that he's going to help you to become better and to change and to become something more than you are. And men are motivated by that. But it isn't just a personal thing. See, this is what's so cool. In my mind, like, this is what makes the restored gospel so amazing, is this concept not only of personal salvation, but of building the kingdom of God, of building Zion.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like, in a world that is self-centered, or that's socialist and some sort of we're going to use the tools of the government to fix the world, we're providing a third way, saying, no, we're going to build from the inside out. We're going to transform ourselves and help other people through the grace of Christ transform themselves. And that's going to transform the world. And what's crazy is that it's not going to start from, I'm not looking outside to fix first. I'm starting with me and my family. And you can actually see it change. Like, you get better. And you start going, what could be better than this? I want to share this with everyone. and I want to try and make this world something better. And it also infuses everything I do. And this is kind of my own personal thing. Like everything I do, I can connect to this grand purpose. Why am I going to work? Well, I'm going to work to build the kingdom of God. In my business, I'm going to try and provide an excellent service to people who need it. I'm going to try and provide my employees with more knowledge and light and information so that they can provide a better service for other people. In my marriage, I'm going to have a better relationship with my wife, and she's going to develop, and we're going to develop. And there's just this, it's like, it's exciting.
Yes.
And it's like, what's the alternative? Like, what are you going to go do? What are you going to go do with your life? You're going to go be just a hedonist loser like the rest of them and, just like embrace, there is a vision here that when men get it, it can change everything. And I think also men in society are so thirsty for this.
So true.
Absolutely. It like the biggest frustration is that in a world today where there's so much hunger for this, that you have droves of people showing up for Jordan Peterson lectures and buying these books. And I'm like, we have this.
I know. And we had it for a long time, right?
Exactly. It's just like, this is our missionary opportunity. We can give people the water that they're thirsty for if we can just learn to help them understand what it is.
Right.
And when we fail in doing that, it's such a lost opportunity as I see it.
Right.
And I think that if we want to motivate men in the church and get them, connect the gospel to their nature, if we can connect this narrative of building the kingdom of God so that we're all united in doing that, and we're a brotherhood who this is what we're doing. And yeah, we're getting together a couple times a month to chat, but that's ultimately the real work we do is when we walk out of those doors. And whether we do things together or whether we do them individually, they're connected to this bigger purpose of who we are as priesthood holders that are trying to change the world.
Right.
And that, like, again, I can't think of a more compelling story than that.
I know, it is so compelling and it's so redemptive, and we're desperate for that redemption. And here's the thing, like, we don't have to wait around for the institutional church to put some program in place or, give us the go ahead or whatnot. Like, they've already done it. You don't even have to wait for your Elders Quorum president, your bishop, or anybody. Just do it. Like, go reach out and change the culture, change the dynamic happening in Elders Quorum, and you can do it. Like, that's the beauty of it. We don't have to wait around and hope that somebody at the top gets that revelation. They've already received it.
And as someone who does leadership stuff, and I having been led in companies and things and have employees and that, there's nothing I love more than when someone comes to me and says, hey, I have this idea. Here's how we can implement it. And then you go out and do it. And if it needs church approval, then great. But also, not everything needs to be church sanctioned.
No. Yeah, I didn't ask my Elders Quorum president if I could have some guys over for a movie. I just did it, and it blessed their lives, and we're more.
Or if you can start a podcast.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
There's so much good you can do in the world.
Yeah.
And I see so many people that want to point to the institution and say, well, the institution, no. And fine, maybe there's some fair critique here and there, but it's like, well, then go and do it yourself.
Right.
Get the resources together, get the people together, create a private institution if necessary. The church has certain things that it has to stick to. It can't do everything, but hopefully the church will empower us in the sense of giving us the character morally and spiritually to be the type of people who go out into the world and change it for the better within our own private institutions and organizations that we create. And that's something that I think the church can and should do. So anyway, any final thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, I love talking about this stuff, and there's so much opportunity here to make a difference. And this is one area we're focused on at Leading Saints. So you can jump on over to our YouTube channel or subscribe on whatever podcast feed you like, and we'll continue to talk about these topics.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Kurt. It's been great.
It was a pleasure.
So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it.